Today's guest is someone who truly embodies the idea of listening to life's whispers and having the courage to follow them. Robert Mulhall has spent his career at the intersection of leadership, spirituality, and service. Over the past 2 decades, he has moved fluidly between the worlds that don't always talk to each other: business, public health, global development, leadership coaching, and spiritual practice. He's worked with organizations like PricewaterhouseCoopers, co-founded a social enterprise, led global innovation programs with partners like UNICEF, and most recently served as the CEO of the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, one of the most respected spiritual and wellness retreat centers in the world. Along the way, he's trained as an executive coach, Enneagram practitioner, Reiki practitioner, mindfulness meditation teacher, and even in Celtic Irish shamanism. But perhaps the thread that runs through it all is Robert's deep curiosity about transformation, how people change, how organizations evolve, and how we learn to listen to the quiet inner guidance that nudges us towards the next chapter. And interestingly enough, Robert has followed those nudges many times in his life, even when they didn't make logical sense at the time. So today we're going to talk about what it really means to listen to those whispers, the lessons he's learned from some of the most renowned spiritual teachers in the world, and how we can all get better at recognizing when life is asking us to move. Hi, Robert.
Hey, good to be with you both.
Oh, we're so glad to have you here. As Robin was saying in the intro, I think the thing that we always are fascinated by are those people who have that courage to listen to the whispers. And I know we're going to get into that more in this conversation, but we'd love to just start with where you grew up. For those who can hear you, they'll notice that little Irish accent in your voice. And you grew up in kind of an unconventional environment. Tell us a little bit about that and how that shaped you as a person and your journey moving forward.
Yeah, my parents, mostly my father, but both my parents really inspired by Eastern spirituality. And when they started to have kids, they were like, look, we want to have our kids have some sort of foundation in this. And so they co-founded a school in Ireland that looked like a room in a building with 4 students and one parent who became the teacher. And they just said, we're just going to experiment. And that then became like an elementary and high school, still going today, very strong. But at the core of that education were some really profound principles. And they included every human being in its essence is whole and complete already. So this idea that society tells us that we're somehow missing something, that if we just got the next degree or the next title or more money, or we bought the next thing, we'd feel complete. That if we just turned towards ourselves, we would remember that completeness. And so while we were learning about history and science and French and whatever else in school, we were also learning about these things. And that was interwoven with meditation practices. And already at that time in the 80s, they knew that society was going to be trying to steal our attention. So they wanted us to be able to attend, because they said, if you can attend to the present moment, you'll be able to remember your true essence, because everything you need is in the present moment. So we would spend hours just drawing, like, let's say we'd spend an hour drawing a line down a page or trying to draw the perfect circle. And that would be it. That's all you do for the hour. Just try and draw a perfect circle, but not like methodically draw it with sort of effort. It was, could you let that circle flow through the movement of your wrist? And they were like, if we can help young people develop that capacity to attend, then think about what that's going to do for them when they're in a meeting, how they're going to be able to listen, how they're going to be able to track information and then synthesize it in ways that other people just won't be able to because of how their attention has been stolen. Grew up with all of these things, and that meant going on retreats. I remember being pretty young, and the grown-ups were going away on retreats. And I was like, why can't the kids do this? And they were like, well, we don't have anything for you. And I basically asked for a meeting with whoever was in charge. I think I was 10, and I said I'd like to meet the decision maker and have a conversation. So we did, and pretty soon after that, we were getting invited on these retreats with grown-ups. And we were like, why do all these people complain about what's a mortgage and why are they complaining about it? And like all these things. And then they were like, we need to create something that's a little bit more focused just for the young people, which they did. And that was an incredible foundation.
When would you say then that you first started meditating?
4 or 5 years old.
That still blows my mind. And yet it seems so logical because children at that age are just so open to and to receiving that and are present. I'm just thinking about, watching a little one, even with their pen for the first time, and how they are so present when they're doing it versus us now as we scribble thinking 6 thoughts ahead of ourselves. So a wonderful foundation to have as a
Yeah.
child and to grow up with.
I
Yeah.
feel like your parents should be doing this for many other people around the world.
Yeah. They wanted to do something different in Ireland. They wanted to offer a more expanded education opportunity for young people in Ireland that was beyond the government or the sort of pretty much the Catholic Church education system. And they had not gotten the answers that they were seeking in their own lives from those institutions. So they were like, well, let's not just send our kids down the same path. Like, let's take a risk and see what happens. And they did. And for better, or for worse, I'm one of the outputs of that risky experiment.
Wow. I think even for those listening right now or watching, you can feel your energy. You have such a calming, grounding energy. And you can feel that even in the way that you speak. There's a frequency to that. And so I feel like maybe part of that's innate, but the other part of that comes from, I would think, all of this practice that you've had.
Yeah, they used to talk about it in the school in Sanskrit. One of the words is sattva, and it's just kind of, there's a lot to it, but in a simple way of speaking about it, it's like an internal quality that can move through you. But we all have it. But these contemplative practices like meditation and mindfulness, etc., they cultivate more of it. So a lot of what they were trying to help us do was cultivate more of this in ourselves, in our presence. But they also built it into the rhythm of the day. So I didn't know this until much later, or, when you saw it on TV, but most schools begin and end a subject or a class with the ringing of a bell, and everybody knows that's when you change. We didn't do that. We didn't have a bell. The teachers tracked the time, and then they would say, okay, let's fall into silence. And so we would begin and end every class with some sort of like contemplative mindfulness piece. And that was just like, can we start this class from a great place? No matter what has happened in this class, can we end it in a still place? And you were just moving through that in that rhythm the whole time. And then that's kind of what I got formally. But then I also had this deep blessing of growing up on the side of a mountain near the Irish Sea and being like a very sort of true nature boy. I was just in that all the time. My mum used to say, if in doubt, get outside. I think she was delighted when I would go outside as well, young boy with a lot of energy. But I just spent a lot of time in that natural world that completely informed me as a human being as well.
Can we talk about the nudges? One of our favorite things to talk about. How do you define that, those whispers that we've been just talking about in the introduction? And how did you learn to pay attention and follow that inner guidance?
One thing about the Irish is that we like to come at things sort of sideways. We're not like as direct, which makes a lot of people like us. It's kind of a cute way of being in the world. And so even the invitation to define something, I'm like, oh, I don't want to define it because it feels really mysterious. But the way I'd talk about it from the edges would be my experience of that nudge. Sometimes it feels really external, and sometimes it literally feels like something is moving me towards something, like a magnetic sort of pull push experience. Other times it feels like an internal sort of rising. Something is just rising inside of me. And it's just like, it becomes a certainty or it becomes a compulsion that has to be followed. And whenever I follow them, everyone's like, that's a huge risk. How can you do this? And they never feel like risks. They just feel like absolutely what has to be done. And therefore, my mind can get caught in like anxiety of will it work out, etc. But the more I followed them, the quieter that's gotten. And because I look back at my life and I go, it's just like, yes, I've worked hard. Yes, I've shown up for a lot of things. And I'm in a body that has a lot of privilege, right? In a cisgender, straight, white male body in Turtle Island, North America. I get a lot of privilege with that. And there's a lot of grace happening in my life. So a combination of those things helps me have less anxiety about following these nudges, which often to other people look like these big sort of life pivots. And they take me on these incredible journeys and explorations. And looking back, somebody once asked me, what's been your approach to your career? And I'd never thought about it. I said, I've treated it like a jungle gym to explore rather than a ladder to climb. And that's allowed me to have a lot of variety and a lot of nourishment, but also allowed me to not feel gripped by I have to keep going in this direction when that direction no longer feels like it's meant for me.
Wow.
That's a really powerful thought that I think most of us don't always follow. So thank you for that. The jungle gym to explore rather than a ladder to climb.
I think that if we can go slow enough, we will always see that there's a choice. It might have really hard ramifications in our life, but there's always a choice. There's always a choice to walk away from something that, again, might have really hard ripples in it. And I've experienced that in my life many times. But I think a lot of the time people forget that there's a choice. And when we feel that we don't have choice, then we feel like we don't have power. Most folks are then moving through life in a very powerless place. And then the victim mentality can kind of creep in. And then it's when you get calcified there, it gets very hard. Our listening for the whispers and the nudges gets really closed down because our story about what life is that it's kind of happening to us rather than for us or through us. And then you kind of just look at people who are moving through life that are maybe following these whispers and nudges. And there's either just a total confusion about this human being or like a sort of an attacking of them. When we feel disempowered, we don't often like when other people are moving through life with more flow and ease. But we have to be willing, we always have to be willing to let go of something to make that choice. And a lot of the time, we don't have the support systems to do that well. We don't have community. We might have people in our lives, but that real sense of community, like, are all of these people really going to show up for me? If I say I'm going to step out of this career path or I'm going to step out of this relationship and I don't know what the next step is, will you, my community, actually hold me? Will you feed me? Will you house me? Like, will you do all these things? Sometimes it's hard just to try and get a lift to the airport these days. And people will be faster to pay for your Uber than to drive you to the airport. And so I hold a lot of compassion as well for folks that feel like they can't follow these nudges, because we as a society are continuing to sort of weaken this sense of deep community, that we're actually all supposed to be doing this together, healing together, growing together, grieving together. We're all doing it in these little tiny silos, which is just not what any of our ancestors did.
And I would say even more and more in these last few years, because there's even less people, let's say, going to work together, right? They're working from home by themselves and feeling probably even more isolated, even though we have access to virtual meetings and things like that. There's so much in what you just said in terms of people feeling powerless
And alone. Like,
and
there is a
alone.
statistical loneliness epidemic in the westernized world. And I run these conscious leadership programs. They're week-long programs that really go into looking at the existing paradigm around leadership and saying, we're leaving that at the door. We're going to go into something very different and new, but that means you are going to have to be willing to let go of a lot of how you think you need to be as a leader. And so it's a sort of a pretty deep transformational experience. And as part of that, there's all of this letting go. There's a reckoning that, when you're in a position of leadership, there are moments of deep aloneness. You can't turn to the other human beings with you. Maybe it's a legal reason you can't turn to them. You and whoever know this legal thing, and you can't tell anybody else about that thing with the employee, but it's causing you an immense amount of stress or whatever. It's the first thing you wake up and think about. Or maybe the other human being that you work with, never with you two, of course, but is causing the challenge for you. So you can't turn to the other human being or whatever it is. And you go, so where do you go? Where do you go where you can actually feel really understood? Because you can turn to your friend, but they don't get all the context. They don't know anything.
You're speaking to like something that I haven't really ever articulated or thought about. And you're right, not with Karen, but in other parts of my professional life.
Yeah.
I've totally felt that.
And you can't turn and you go, okay, so the humans aren't the place. It's great when they can be, but they're not always there. So then if we're not supposed to do this alone, where do we go? And this is also part of my upbringing is this, and the richness of the Irish tradition is that you turn to your ancestors. And so what does it look like to develop a practice where you open up a relationship with your ancestors in like the subtle world? And then you introduce yourself to them. And then you might bring questions to them and ask for advice and guidance. Like your ancestors can become your advisors, your counsel. They talk a lot about now. We don't want certain people leading things. I want a council of grandmothers leading the world, a council of grandmothers looking after the world, because you know they're going to look after the children, they're going to look after the important things. But we have these councils of our ancestors who are, and this is going back not that many generations before. This is what they were doing all the time. They would turn to the ancestors who had gone before us, and we would take our questions to them and seek advice. But we wouldn't just limit our ancestors to our human bloodline. We would see and understand that our ancestors were also the trees, and they were the stones, and they were the elements of fire and wind and water, etc. And so what is it like to go sit with your back against an oak tree and tell it how terrified you are, that you are so gripped by fear or anxiety, and ask it to help you and support you? What is it like to go in a sort of a guided journey or meditation and find yourself around a fire with some sort of presence or being that you may have no familiarity with? And then you just ask it, what do I need to know now? And be blown away by how precise and accurate for your life this presence is in what it shares with you. That, when the humans can't show up, that's available to us. But a lot of our practices, even in the spiritual world, are not about that. They're very much still about just you with you. And so I'm a big fan of how do we expand our sense of relationship and our access to information, wisdom, power, and love that's way beyond anything that I can just conjure up myself.
Wow. I've never thought of actually doing that the way that you just described it. I think we've thought of the practice of, yes, channel my grandmother. She's a powerful soul, and I channel her all the time, but I've never thought about calling in the wisdom of ancestors beyond her, let alone pulling in the nature elements as well into that conversation in a way. But again, the way you describe it, Robert, I can see it, and I can see how powerful that could be.
Yeah. And important to do it well, like in this reciprocity where if we go to nature to seek support, or we go to our ancestors, that we bring them something. Maybe we bring them an offering. In Ireland, you would bring an offering of oats. You just leave dried oats or hawthorn berries or something like this. Maybe it's a song or a poem, but you always give before this sort of asking of receiving. And then with, just in case folks that are listening, they're like, okay, I'm going to sit down and talk to my ancestors. Always asking only the ancestors who are well, the ancestors who are healthy and well, because there's a lot of ancestors that have not done the work in the other world and have not quite settled things down. It's like just with the ancestors who are well.
Well, I'm also thinking too, when you were talking about as a child, that child running around in nature, I feel like you were already dialoguing without maybe even realizing. I don't know, maybe you did realize it, but I feel like you were playing with the element then.
Yeah, all the time. And there were farmers nearby and they used to go out and hunt. And I grew up vegetarian in my family because my parents were inspired. And so one of 4 vegetarian families in all of Ireland. And I would follow the farmers who would go out and hunt. And then I would hide somewhere out of the line of the gunshot, but I would hide in the bushes or the long grass. And I would be trying to talk to the rabbits. I'd be trying to talk to the rabbits to tell them what was coming and where to go. And then in Ireland, one of the fields, there was what's known as a fairy ring. So there's a lot of stone structures in Ireland. There's hundreds to thousands of them that are these sacred monuments that are used for different ceremonial practices. But there were also these literally rings of, looked like a different shade of grass in the field, but it was just like in a circle. Now, I am sure there is some botanical reason for the shading of the grass that way. But in Ireland, as a kid, you understood that this was where the fairies lived. This is the wee folk, the good people, the Undini She, we would say in Irish. And you knew that if your soccer, football, rugby ball went in there, it just stayed there. It stayed there until the elements moved it out, because this was their sacred place. And so I wasn't doing deep practice work with these wee folk, but there was just a deep appreciation of it. Same with, I mentioned the hawthorn berries. The hawthorn tree is one of the very sacred trees in Ireland. And to this day, you can go to any farmer in Ireland and say, do you believe in fairies? And some of them will say yes, but even the ones that say no, I don't believe in any of that nonsense. You say, great, go cut down that hawthorn tree. And they would absolutely not. They won't touch them, because that's one of the portals or belonging places for these folks. And so even if the tree falls over in the wind, it won't be removed. It will just be allowed to decay in its place, because if they disturb it, it upsets the balance of the relationship and the nature. And you don't want to bring that on. So that's where a lot of our ideas around superstition come from. It's like, it'll bring you bad luck. It's about because we've upset the balance of things. And so there's a lot of old beliefs and traditions that try to maintain the balance of things that we just don't understand with our minds.
Respect too.
Yeah. Respect for what we don't know and we don't understand, and the mystery of it.
Yes. Yeah. I have a question for those, when we talk about sitting down and channeling and or just having that conversation and receiving messages from these ancestors. For someone who's never done that, how would you suggest someone start?
Well, I'd always say is don't change your life based on what you hear. If you're just starting out, don't leave the marriage. Don't quit the job after 5 minutes of trying to practice.
Yes. Good advice.
Yeah. It's a good rule for like any retreat that you ever go on. Wait 3 months. You think you've fallen in love with somebody new. You think you've fallen out of love. You think whatever. You're now supposed to be a retreat leader yourself. Wait 3 months and see how you feel. Because if it's really meant to be, and you should be able to wait 3 months. But for a lot of the practice, there's an encouragement to sort of open and go up. There's a lot of like encouragement towards the light, stay away from the dark. For me, that's beautiful. And that sort of sense of openness, really, well, I'll call it like at the top half of the body. But I'm very interested in, and they call that like waking up, right? I'm very interested in waking down. And what does it mean to go down into the human experience? Not out and away from the human experience, not away from the hard parts of humaning, but down into the human experience, down into the lower part of the body, even physically into the lower part of the body, which is so often, we don't talk about these things, right? Whether it's the joys and pleasure of sex, or so many of my female friends have shared that how much they feel they carry in their wombs, and how that's so little of the spiritual practices seem to encourage people to go down into the body and really tend and see what's there. But when we go down, we're moving down towards the Earth Mother and down into our deeper relationship with her. And so for people that are starting out, I encourage them to be going down rather than going up. And that down takes you down into a very grounded place, because channeling or whatever it is, intuitive sort of feelings can be ungrounding in our lives. It can be ungrounding and unsettling and quite disturbing to receive a lot if you open up in that way. And it can, you walk through New York City and things are open and you feel very sensitive. So what is the grounding practice like? And that's why I think so many of these traditions that have come from all over the world, but particularly the ones that the West has sort of exposed itself to from the East, the teachings of yoga and the teachings from Buddhism and the meditation practices and all of that, they're saying, please do these silent sitting practices, because the Western world and our culture is so like up and bubbly and what's new and shiny and chase and move. There's very little sitting. At some point, you've maybe been to somewhere in Mediterranean Europe and you walk around a plaza and the kids might be running around, but the older people are just sitting around the plaza on a bench, almost doing nothing. And they know that they have won in life when they're sitting on a bench in the evening doing almost nothing. In America, that's like you failed. We say, how are you? I'm busy, as if that's an emotion. And then people say, oh, that's a good thing. And you go, is it? And so slowing down, grounding, and building a practice around that, so that when you then want to open up, prepare yourself to open up, basically. And then it's going to be much easier to be in those kind of experiences and conversations. I think it's the same with the psychedelic world. Many, many people jumping in, and medicine is deeply powerful. There's a lot of people jumping in with no established practice beforehand and no practice afterwards. So it's peak experiences over a weekend, or over a week with no way to really integrate, no community to integrate these things with, and no practices to actually integrate them into their lives, then it's just more peak experience chasing. And then people are like, why isn't my life feeling different? It's because nothing has changed, right? We're not supporting ourselves in this change process.
Yeah, I think so many people have that desire to do something. It's that they feel that nudge. They feel the draw to learn more about themselves, to be more spiritual, to connect more. So many are, but they don't know exactly how to do that. And you're right, there's not always the resources and support at the other end. I want to go back to what you were saying earlier about if you go on a retreat, wait 3 months before you make a big decision. One of the themes that we've gotten from your life is you've made so many different choices in your life, in your careers, in your life. If you were to describe it to somebody and somebody's feeling like that nudge that something is done and it's time to move on, but everybody would say, oh my gosh, you're out of your mind. Why would you do that? Sure. How do you work with that? How do you recognize it? How do you have the courage to act upon it, particularly if it means maybe even completely reversing direction, starting completely over?
Few things, because sometimes you're not even necessarily aware of a nudge or a whisper. You're just like, I don't think this is working. But that's like a very mental thought, right? It's not like some other sort of sense of, oh, I'm getting guidance from somewhere else. It's just like, this is hard. I'm not enjoying myself anymore. Relationship, work, whatever. And there's a really simple framework. It's actually from a guy called Seth Godin, the marketing business guy, and his book, The Dip. It's tiny. It's like 40, 50 pages long. You'll read it literally in an hour, and a lot's to it. But the simplified way that I explain it is he does multiple scenarios, but the two that pop out for me when I'm making these decisions or encouraging others to look at it is you have this over time, you start something and the graph goes up, right? It starts to go up. You get this sort of sense of, oh, this is good. This is feeling good. I'm getting some wins. Things are feeling great. Maybe you've experienced this with the podcast. Yes, we're getting traction. We're getting more viewers. We're getting more likes. We're getting more clicks. And then it sort of seems to hit a plateau, and then it starts to dip down. And you're like, oh, this isn't feeling as fun as it was. This feels a little bit more like a grind. How do we take it to the next level? We don't know. And you feel like you're in this dip. He says, in the dip, what often happens is people quit because it's hard, because we don't know how to be with hard, right? So we quit the dip. He says, it's okay to quit something, but don't quit a dip, quit a dead end. He says, you have to sit with yourself and only you will truly know, is this going to change, or does this have the high probability of change? Not the like dating for potential, oh, I hope they'll be different, but the true reckoning with, do I actually think this will change? And if it feel like it'll change, you're just in a dip. That means just find a way to resource yourself through the dip and then ride the upswing again. And then there'll be many of those. If it's a dead end, you got to quit as fast as you possibly can. And that's been a helpful framework for myself, and it's been a helpful framework for other people. But this idea that winners never quit, he says, winners quit all the time. They just quit at the right time. They don't quit the dip, they quit the dead end. And it's the same with, he talks about it with the stock market and all of these kind of things. And so that's a helpful way of looking at it when you don't have those very strong sort of urges moving through and insights. And then my dad, he's passed on, his name's Shane. His career advice was get really clear on what it is that you deeply love and then get really good at it. He says, because you can love something, and if you're not good at it, most likely the world's not going to match those things up for you. They're not going to help you make a career out of it. But if you're really good at it and you deeply love it, then there's a greater chance that it could actually be a paid career for you as well. But there's a lot of people that feel like they're jumping into things without it really coming from the deepest place inside of them. It's almost like, I just don't want to be a part of that, so I'm going to go do this opposite thing, as opposed to actually just coming from themselves. It's like a reaction. I didn't like the way my mom parented me. My mom is great. If she ever listens to this, my mom's amazing. But, I don't want to be like my mom, so I'm going to be the opposite to my mom. The problem is we're still not just being ourselves, and we're not listening to that internal feeling of, there's a lot of talk around purpose. Purpose is not something that you do. It's something that you are. And in that way, then you can bring your purpose forward in anything you do. So people are also sometimes get caught in this, well, I'm deeply passionate about being an artist, so my career has to be as an artist. Drop below passion, drop below career into purpose. For me, my purpose is really simple. It's just to serve with love. That's why I'm here for as long as I'm here. It's to serve with love. And then I can do that when I'm going to buy milk. I can do that when I'm in a board meeting. I can do that when I'm one-on-one with my son. I can do that when I'm with my friends. I can do that in any moment. I can do that now. And therefore, I can live my purpose in any moment, regardless of what I'm doing. I'd also suggest to people try to unhook this like perfect structure around how we're living our lives and drop below anything that feels like a binary and just go below that. And from that place, come back out and move into your life.
Well, and you've been able to do that in so many different ways. And as you said, you're doing this in every day in all ways. But when people look at that from even the professional standpoint, you've worked in all these different industries. And to navigate that with that underlying purpose is very different than I would say probably most people that you were around.
I don't know about them, but for me, I'm lying on my deathbed. I'm going to be looking back. It's going to be about what was the quality of my love and my presence. That'll be my sort of evaluation question.
And then when you started out, even from a professional standpoint, did you have that knowing that the underlying purpose was to serve with love? Because I feel like most people don't understand that the real reason we are here, our real purpose may be to serve with love, may be to learn compassion, may be to live with empathy. It's these much larger concepts. Did you know that then?
My upbringing definitely was pointing me towards many things like this, but I didn't have that clarity. But when I was 22, a mentor asked me what was my purpose, and I didn't know. And he said, you should not leave this room until you know. So it was a small group of us, and we basically spent the day deeply going into our hearts, like our soul's hearts, and going, why am I here?
Wow.
And we didn't leave. And then, so I'm 45 now, from 22, I've had that guidance, that deep clarity. And having that, then it has made decision-making very easy.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I've been on my own spiritual journey for quite some time, and I'm now 50, but it wasn't really even until my early 40s that I understood really why I'm here.
Or to even ask the question, like to ask the question with that much depth. We all can say it almost in passing, or we'll ask our kids as they're getting ready for college, to go there. But that's such a deep question. And to have that opportunity at that age to ask it and then answer it, that's so unusual.
And like so much fortune and blessing in my life around these things. And then the other thing that I grew up with was all of this blessing. So you're like, what are you going to do with that? And my dad at 13 giving me books about Dr. King and Gandhi and saying, these are people you should understand. And something about how my dad, feel tender every time I bring him in, just he understood me in a very deep way. And so he knew that giving me those books at that age, it was perfectly designed. And he knew the ways to connect with what was already moving inside of me. And so my life, it's just dedicated to service and spirit. And in that way, it makes it very simple. And so when I was leaving PricewaterhouseCoopers, I was doing an amazing job that I deeply loved in an organization that I felt a lot of respect for, and it was really supportive to me. And then I did get a very strong whisper one day at a laptop working away. And I co-founded this social enterprise with friends. And we were doing beautiful work, but all very like small scale volunteers. And then this internal, external nudge just said, it's time to leave and go run that full time. And I was mid email typing. I went, I'm not ignoring that. And then I told a friend, they said, oh, I just heard about this grant that you can apply for. It's due in 2 weeks. I basically spent the next 2 weeks writing a business plan for this grant, applied for it. It said, you could either win €5,000 or €70,000 and you get an award with this grant. And so I applied, heard a few weeks later, and they said, come in for the interviews. And it was like a Shark Tank sort of pitch. It was unbelievable. I'd never done anything like that before, but basically the top Irish business people were there and they were just like trying to find the holes, like the Shark Tank. It was brilliant. And I walked out of there. I had no idea if I had won or anything like that. I just went straight back, wrote up my resignation letter, handed it to my boss. And I said, I'm giving you 3 months. I have to go do this thing without knowing if we'd gotten any money. At that time, as a social enterprise, we were a nonprofit. We didn't have pennies to rub together. And it was also 2007. The world economy was crashing. I had bought 2 houses in Ireland, massive negative equity on them because the housing market had collapsed. Like, you could not have picked a worse time to do any of these things. And went back, gave my resignation, worked out my 3 months at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And in that time, I found out that we had won an award, but the €5,000, not the €70,000. And I was just like, okay. And then you just figure out the next piece. And so I spoke to somebody and I said, will you make a donation that will give me a very small salary for the next 4 months? And then we'll turn that. I just need 4 months of runway. And then 4 months. And I created another 4 months in those 4 months and then another 4 months in those months.
And here you are.
And here I am. And the next year we won the 70,000, and it was great.
Wow. It's following the nudge. And for you, it was absolute no matter what.
Yeah. It was like, I have to do this. Just very, very clear inside of me. For me, in the life that I live, like truly the worst, apart from somebody dying or getting very, very sick, the worst thing that happens to me when I take one of these risks, because of the safety net that I have in my life, is that I'm now in North America. So it feels different. The safety net in Ireland feels bigger for me. But here, the worst that happens is I take a big leap. It doesn't work out, in quotes. And I end up like sleeping in someone's house with my son for a while, for a few months, until I figure out the next thing. But it's not like my whole life doesn't unravel. And very quickly, I'm just sort of out on the streets. Now, other people are way closer to that sort of financial insecurity. I'm not. So everybody has to assess where they're at in this whole process. And I try to own where I'm at and not make it just sound like, oh, you can just live your life like this and just jump around and do whatever you want. It's within the context of my life. But because of that blessed context, my heart just feels so committed to that service and for the upliftment of all beings.
Can you talk a moment about Kripalu and what that experience was like for you working with all of those spiritual teachers? And then what happened then? What whisper came to you then to take you to the next part of your journey?
Yeah. So I joined Kripalu a little bit before COVID, and then during COVID took over as CEO.
Talk about what Kripalu is.
So Kripalu, it means compassion in Sanskrit. It's the largest spiritual well-being center in North America, if not the world. It's kind of hard to measure all these things, but it's definitely the largest. North America. It serves about 50,000 people a year, 500 different types of retreats happening at any time, and a whole thing online as well. It's a nonprofit. It's been going for over 50 years. Started as an ashram, intentional community. And then over time, when the guru was asked to leave the community for lots of reasons, which you can read about on the website, it then became an educational nonprofit and started to offer what it was offering much more publicly. And so, I came in, I took over November 2020, depths of COVID hell and rough spot. There wasn't like a deep plan. The money was moving out the door very quickly. Its whole business model is around people coming through the doors. That was not possible. It was illegal in Massachusetts. You couldn't gather in large numbers at that point. There was no sense of any light at the end of the tunnel for anything to be different. And so I took over in that context. We had over 400 staff and we had gone down to 30. So there was just this tiny team trying to keep the lights on and the community connected and trying to serve people that were obviously having very challenging times through COVID. Spent the next 5 years living into that role as CEO, and we got to do some really beautiful things. A big part of it was that we wanted to take down the barriers to access that some of these centers and institutions have. The geographical barriers we were able to take down with putting things online. Cultural barriers meant that we as an organization had to go in and start to really look at ourselves and our culture. We felt like we were a place of welcoming and belonging. But then when we spoke to other folks, people from the global majority, Black, Indigenous, BIPOC folks, they were saying they were having a different experience. So we went in and did a lot of deep reckoning around that and started to find amazing people to partner with that allowed more of those barriers to diminish. And we looked at the financial barriers because it costs something to go to these places and it's not always accessible for folks. And pre-pandemic, the organization was doing about 250 scholarships, give or take. And we just said, we have to change this story. We have to change this reality. And we just stuck with it. And there was a lot of people saying, this is impossible. You're going to break the bank. There's no money. You're going to have to raise $10 million extra a year. We can never do that. Da, 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 da. And in the last 3 years, we did 25,000 scholarships.
Wow.
And a lot of that was just about it, not accepting the answer no. And just saying, if we want to be in our integrity, then these wisdom traditions have been widely available and accessible throughout millennia. And we as an organization should be, as best we can, creating as much accessibility to this. Because if we want to see a consciousness shift and a culture change in our world, then the more people that have access to this, the more we're living into our mission. And so we did that. And then that allowed us to then partner with amazing organizations. We're looking at like some of the peace challenges in the world and mothers that had lost children to gun violence in the United States would come. And we brought artists and leaders from nonprofits to come and resource themselves so they could go back into their societies and serve from a more balanced place. And we got to do a lot of rich work. When I started, the board always said, how long do you want to stay for? And I said, that's not my decision. Ultimately, Spirit's going to decide that. And they were like, well, that's not a typical answer. And I understand that, but that's the only answer I got for you. And last year I went to the woods for a quest, a solo quest, to be with my relations of the trees and the river and my ancestors and the stars. And I wanted to ask some big questions. And I got this visitation from the presence of a grandmother spider. Wasn't an actual spider, just the sort of sense of grandmother spider. She said it was time. I said, okay.
Good thing you're not afraid of spiders.
Good thing I'm not afraid of spiders.
Yeah. It's true.
And then it was time. I'll trust that. And then moved through the transition. And then I've been spending the last 3 or 4 months now, took some time just to rest and travel. And that's been fantastic. And now stepping into this kind of new chapter of bringing forward all of what I've been gifted and shared around the Irish Celtic shamanic work and offering those healings and retreats around that, but then also doing the work with organizations that want to really transform. They want to live and operate in a different way. And so it's fun to start to explore that and pick that work up again.
Well, when you talk about the Celtic Irish shamanism, can you explain that for those who don't know what that is?
Yeah. And I use the word shamanism, like there's no Irish word for shamanism, but it's a relatively well understood word. There's a lot to it. The ancestral work can certainly be a part of it, but it's really about a way of being and living. It's a way of understanding the world, that there is no separation between us. We all look and feel and sound different, but at some inherent level, there is a togetherness, a oneness, an interbeing, like Thich Nhat Hanh would say. And if we can see that, then you, Robin, and when we're having some sort of conflict, if I can really hold that there's no separation between us when we're in conflict, how is that going to change the way I'm in conflict with you? How is that going to change how I show up and speak with you as I speak to myself, as I understand that your pain is my pain? How does that shift the way I make decisions as a leader of an organization or a leader of a government as a nation, that if I truly understand there's no separation between me and the trees and the earth, then what I do to them, I do to myself. And that if I understand that there are people oppressed in the world, then I am not free, no matter how much freedom I have in my life to go and do nice things. There's a part of me that's not free if these other people are not free. And so to understand that, but not just as a human being, but to understand it in a deeply sort of relational way with the natural world. And then to start to look at our lives. And we talk about the wheel and the spiral in the Celtic traditions, that the whole year is a wheel and that there's a rhythm to it. And am I, as best I can, in attunement with that rhythm? So the Celtic New Year starts at Samhain or Halloween, and it starts at the time when darkness starts. Because to this point of waking down and in, as opposed to up and out, the Celtic tradition is actually winter is where the seeds grow. It looks like nothing's happening. And the people really struggle with the winters of their lives. When things aren't productive, maybe they're trying to be in a relationship and it's not happening. But that's the time when actually great things are happening unseen underneath the soil. So I always tell people, don't rush through whatever winter you're in. Give it the time it needs. Because if you get to spring too soon, the snow thaws and you get there too quickly, then they haven't had enough time in the womb before they're birthed into spring. And so at Kripalu, we used to ask people to build these annual plans, but they weren't allowed to start anything new in winter. They had to wait to the energetic time of the beginning of February, which is known as Imbolc in the Irish tradition. And so that's when energetic spring happens. So that's naturally when things would have an energy to them. You feel that as well. This New Year's January 1st thing, we're all trying to push into something that is not real. That's like a false thing. We're supposed to be hibernating with the bears at this point, but we're all trying to like set goals and da-da-da-da. But if you wait till around this time, a few weeks ago, you start to feel a little bit more pep in your step, right? You're like, oh, I got some energy for something. And then an organization has energy for something. So then can you actually start to launch new initiatives and projects then? So it's about understanding these natural rhythms and flows and the deep relationship and the inseparability of these things. And then how do you use all of that, combining it with these contemplative practices, ceremonies, to bring forward what feels really mysterious. But the more you sort of play in that space, it actually feels deeply pragmatic and practical. I'll give you just a really quick one. So at Kripalu, I had a dream one night in January 2 years ago. And in that dream, two things happened. One, I was mopping a floor and I was told March 22nd. That was it. The whole of the dream. I was like, oh, that's a pretty unusual and sparse dream, but okay. The next day at nighttime, a pipe burst at Kripalu and flooded. It's a 4-story building, sleeps 700 people. It's a very, very large retreat center, but 3 floors flooded because a pipe burst at like midnight in completely sub-zero temperatures, etc. So it flooded the building and it shut us down for 3 months. So my dream was about me mopping a floor the night beforehand. I was like, okay, paying attention. And then it said March 22nd. And we were trying to decide when we were going to reopen. And so we used March 22nd as the no time before. We wouldn't open before March 22nd. And then we gave ourselves an additional week of buffer on that. And we reopened on March 29th. But if we allow ourselves and if we respectfully step into this work, then we can get wisdom that is very hard to just like create yourself, but you can tap into that is deeply, deeply practical and helpful.
That is such a good example. And wow, oh my goodness.
Never have a dream that's so direct.
Yeah.
So tell us, Robert, now where you are, what is your feeling? Do you have any sense of what is next for you? And how are you bringing that in to your experience now?
Yeah, I wanted to be in winter myself. I wanted to not start something new before that February 1st. And so as best I could, I honored that. And traveling is a way for me to be sort of deeply resourced. So I was able to do that. I'm very grateful. And the very strong whispers that I'm getting are to go and serve organizations, leaders in organizations that want to lead differently, that know that the current paradigms just do not serve us. They're not working. Our world is not moving in the right direction. And so if any of what we're doing is just the same old, then we're just heading in that same direction. And the organizations, businesses, nonprofits that want to be around for lasting change or impact are going to have to transform. And that's going to take deep courage. It's going to take a lot of deep listening and accessing wisdom that we're not going to be able to conjure up with some flip charts and our heads stuck in a board meeting room. So it's going to ask us to become more multidimensional as leaders because the times are deeply uncertain and the complexity is rising. So how do you lead in those times? What is it like to be resourced very deeply? And what is it like to lead from love and give ourselves permission to be organizations that are love-centered, not some word that we have to be worried about because it's a word that HR is concerned about. So it's like, let's define what it means to be an organization that centers love and then see how the world starts to respond to that. And so that work feels really rich and nourishing for me and deeply aligned with how I can serve really well as I'm trained in the Celtic Irish sort of shamanic ways, both as a healing practitioner for one-on-one work with people, that just feel stuck or they want to move to another place in their life. And accessing the Akashic Records is another aspect of that to really help bring in insights for people in that healing work. But then also, I deeply believe here in the United States that it's got such a hard history that it's really hard for this country to reckon with, just hard for it to admit what's true. And all of the very important and powerful work that people are doing around diversity, equity, inclusion to try to understand our biases that we have just been conditioned into us, to understand how systems and structures oppress people in this country. That's all really great and powerful. But my concern is that people that have European ancestry have nowhere to turn after that. They don't know what is a beautiful place that I can go back to. And I want people with European ancestry to go back and reclaim their ancestral ways, to fall in love with their old songs, whether they're Gaelic or Sicilian or whatever it is, to know those things, to know the herbalism of their land, if they can, to go put their bodies on those lands, to know the ceremonies of those places, to go to those sacred sites, and then bring their spirituality forward from that place, rather than going to spirituality of other cultures. Yes, to do that as well in partnership and as a complement, but to come from the place that our ancestors came from. And I think that will help European ancestry people return to a beauty that they've lost, that has been cut off, that often happens with pain-based emigration. But now, where there's no real place for them to turn to a place of deep resourcing and wisdom, I'm like, okay, let's help folks reclaim that. And so whatever I can do through the trainings that I want to offer and the retreats I want to offer around the Irish Celtic way, because I think the Irish is a lot of people just connect with that. And there's some sort of gateway for people in that, even if they really want to, they might go through that towards the Sicilian path later. But somehow the Irish seems to be a soft way in for people.
Yeah, and I think most people have never thought of it that way, that they could actually reclaim that part of themselves by looking into that aspect. I think that in itself, that's a light bulb for some people.
Yeah, there's people all over this land right now that are going to beautiful sweat
You're so
lodges.
right. You're so right. I mean,
the Irish were doing sweat ceremonies for thousands of years too. And there's people in Ireland that are researching it and recreating these sweat ceremonies, but that have got this European ancestral core to it. So then we don't feel like we need to take from somebody else's culture. We could actually bring our culture to meet their culture. And then we're going to sit down and go, oh my God, look how similar.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I love that.
And our spirituality then won't be extractive. We'll actually be bringing something to the table as opposed to taking something from somebody else's culture.
It's so interesting too, because I feel like with everybody wanting to know, going to ancestry.com, just to kind of want to see where I've come from and all of the different cultures that are within me. I think a lot of people just stop there. They have that curiosity about it, but they don't realize part of what they're searching is really their history, their ancestry. And I love what you're saying, because it just invites people to go that one step further to learn. And that's where so much of their soul and spirit and lives inherently. So that makes so much sense. That's inspiring. I love that idea.
And I've heard it reflected back to me from some of the people, folks of color from the global majority that I've been in, say, ceremony with, and that I'll sing a song in Irish in the ceremony, and they'll just reflect back that they haven't heard white people be able to contribute in that way in ceremony, and that they are sometimes surprised that there's somebody that's so willing to lean into their culture, but that somehow, I'm sure it's not universal at all, but these folks have said that there's a healing thing for them as well. There's it's almost like on retreats I've led where men do deep, vulnerable work together. And some of the women have said, just watching those men do that, even these are not men I'm related to in any way, but just watching these men do that healed something inside of me. I think us doing this work will have this ripple healing effect for others as well.
Oh, I can see that. I want to just end with, if there's someone listening today, is there a question or a simple practice that they could start today to start to find more clarity themselves of where they're going?
I'll say two things, and very simple. our bodies are talking to us all the time. So if there's any discomfort in my body, and I have a moment, I did this morning because I woke up with a lot of discomfort in my body, and not physical, like emotional discomfort. I had a lot of energy just in my chest. I couldn't name it. And I just sat with it and I was like, okay. So the first thing is a hand on my chest, bring myself to my body, not just think about my body, but my body to my body. And then I will try to name what I'm feeling. So I'm feeling, could be just like energy, or I'm like, oh, I'm anxious. Or I'll say, oh, I'm afraid. I'm afraid. And I'll just repeat it a few times. I'm afraid. I'm afraid. And then I'll just say, it's okay, sweetheart. And then usually when I say that a few times, it's okay, sweetheart. And then I ask, what else is here? And then I'll notice courage is here. So I'll notice that fear is here and courage is here. And then I'll notice maybe some excitement is here. And then actually I'm hungry. And then just the slowing down, getting really honest with the most vulnerable piece, giving that some love, then allows all of the rest of the parts of us to come to the party. And then I realize I've got all this fear, but look at all this courage I've got. I've got all this fear, but look at all this strength I've got. Because sometimes when it feels like such a grip, it feels like it's the only thing that's there, but it's never the only thing. It's the loudest thing until we name it, we love it, and then other things get louder. And when we do that, then we are wired to be multidimensional. It's not necessarily a thing that we have to learn. We can be trained in it to help us give lots of structure and to like fine tune. But like you said, Karen, like kids come in very attuned and sensitive and intuitive. It's only because we've clouded that over because a parent said, don't be weird, don't do that, don't say that, whatever it is, or a teacher or the friend group or whatever it is, something dimmed that. It's still there. It's naturally part of how we are wired to be. And so it's just about slowing down and giving some space to the noise inside, some comfort to the noise inside, and then allowing us to be just in that softer place. And when that happens, then you're like, oh, look, that's what I can do. It just comes through and it's free.
I feel that. And that's so true. I resonate with that. Thank you for sharing that. I know I'll be practicing.
Great practice.
Oh my goodness. I think we could talk to you for days. Really. Thank you for your courage and thank you for living your truth and your purpose and sharing it with us. I think that you came here to be a teacher for so many of us. You are living it and you are teaching it. And I'm so grateful to be connected to you and for being able to help amplify your teachings with so many people and hope to do more of that.
And reminding us all to listen to those little nudges that come our way. I think so often we're just so caught up in what we're doing and everything that you've been talking about the presence and even this little exercise just to remind us how to get back to that. And thanks to your mom and dad too, by the way.
Thank you to them.
I love how you always name your father. You told us, I think, in a prior conversation, that's something that you learned, name those who have gone before.
Shane. I could feel Shane today.
That Irish powerful strength that you feel. Just taught us so many things, Robert. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. And thanks for having me. I'm deeply grateful to all of my teachers, my parents, and everybody that continues to shape me.
Thank you. And you can find out more about working with Robert at robertmulhall.com. We'll have that in our show notes as well. Thank you.